On October 17, 1989 at 5:04 p.m., the Loma Prieta earthquake struck the San Francisco Bay Area, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. Measuring 6.9 on the Richter scale, the earthquake caused widespread damage, claiming 63 lives and injuring thousands. Known for halting the World Series game between the San Francisco Giants and Oakland Athletics, the quake became a defining moment in California's seismic history. This narrative explores the events leading up to the quake, the immediate aftermath, and the long-term impact on the region's infrastructure and preparedness.
California is no stranger to seismic activity, as it sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, a seismically active region. The San Andreas Fault, which runs along the California coast, is responsible for many of the state's earthquakes. The Loma Prieta segment of this fault, located near the Santa Cruz Mountains, had been dormant for nearly a century before the 1989 earthquake. The San Francisco Bay Area had long been vulnerable to earthquakes, with the devastating 1906 earthquake and fire still fresh in historical memory. By the late 1980s, however, the region had seen substantial growth, with sprawling urban centers, freeways, and bridges connecting the cities of San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose. While the state had implemented modern building codes, much of the region's infrastructure had been built before earthquake-resistant construction became standard practice.
On the afternoon of October 17, 1989, as fans filled Candlestick Park for Game 3 of the World Series, the earth began to shake violently. The epicenter of the earthquake was located in the Santa Cruz Mountains, about 60 miles south of San Francisco. The quake lasted for about 15 seconds, but in that short time, it caused immense destruction across the Bay Area. The Loma Prieta earthquake struck with tremendous force, causing buildings, bridges, and freeways to collapse. The most devastating damage occurred in Oakland, where a section of the Cypress Street Viaduct, part of Interstate 880, collapsed, trapping motorists in their cars and resulting in 42 deaths. The Bay Bridge, a vital link between San Francisco and Oakland, also suffered a partial collapse, severing a critical connection between the two cities. In San Francisco's Marina District, built on unstable landfill, multiple buildings collapsed and fires broke out, further complicating rescue efforts. The region's transportation infrastructure was severely affected, with key freeways rendered unusable and public transit systems disrupted. Electricity and phone lines were downed, making communication and coordination for emergency services difficult. Despite the widespread devastation, the earthquake could have been much worse had it struck at a different time. The fact that it occurred just before the World Series game meant many people were off the roads and gathered in safe, open spaces like Candlestick Park. Nonetheless, the quake left thousands homeless, with entire communities facing the difficult task of rebuilding.
In the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, first responders and volunteers rushed to the scenes of devastation, working tirelessly to rescue survivors trapped in collapsed buildings and vehicles. The Cypress Street Viaduct became a focal point of the rescue effort, as emergency crews battled the clock to pull people from the wreckage. Fires in San Francisco's Marina District were eventually contained, but the damage had already been done. The earthquake left the Bay Area in shock, as people began to grasp the scale of the destruction. Freeways, bridges, homes, and businesses were damaged or destroyed, leaving thousands without shelter and essential services. The World Series was postponed, but the spotlight on Candlestick Park helped bring national attention to the disaster, prompting a swift response from the federal government. President George H.W. Bush declared the region a disaster area, unlocking federal aid for recovery efforts. The resilience of the Bay Area communities was evident in the days following the quake, as people came together to support one another. Volunteers worked alongside emergency services to provide food, shelter, and medical care to those in need. The Red Cross, National Guard, and local government agencies coordinated relief efforts, ensuring that displaced residents had access to essential supplies. In the weeks and months that followed, the focus shifted from rescue to recovery, as the region began the arduous task of rebuilding.
The Loma Prieta earthquake highlighted both the vulnerabilities and strengths of California's infrastructure. It exposed weaknesses in older buildings and transportation systems, particularly those built before modern seismic standards. The partial collapse of the Bay Bridge and the failure of the Cypress Street Viaduct underscored the need for urgent updates to the state's transportation infrastructure. In response, California initiated a large-scale program to retrofit and reinforce bridges, overpasses, and highways to better withstand future earthquakes. The earthquake also served as a critical moment for earthquake preparedness and public awareness. Building codes were updated, and new legislation required stricter standards for earthquake-resistant construction. In the years following Loma Prieta, the state implemented measures to ensure that new buildings and infrastructure could withstand seismic forces, reducing the potential for future tragedies. The psychological impact of the earthquake was profound. For many Bay Area residents, the Loma Prieta earthquake was a stark reminder of the region's susceptibility to earthquakes, reigniting fears of the next big one. The quake prompted individuals and communities to take earthquake preparedness more seriously, with an increased focus on emergency plans, disaster kits, and public education about earthquake safety. Despite the devastation, the recovery process demonstrated the strength and resilience of the Bay Area. Communities rebuilt, and within a few years, the region had largely recovered from the physical damage. The Bay Bridge was fully reopened after retrofitting, and other damaged infrastructure was repaired. Yet, the memory of the Loma Prieta earthquake endures as a reminder of the importance of preparedness in a region where seismic activity is a constant threat.
The Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989 was a turning point in California's seismic history. It exposed the vulnerabilities of the state's infrastructure but also highlighted the resilience of its people. The quake prompted significant improvements in earthquake preparedness, infrastructure retrofitting, and public awareness. As we reflect on the events of that fateful day, we are reminded of the ongoing need for vigilance and preparedness in a region that will always be at risk of seismic activity. The lessons learned from the Loma Prieta earthquake continue to shape California's approach to disaster resilience and public safety.